If you were here last week, you know that we began with a little means of learning these 10 Commandments. And we're going to review that. We're going to do this every week that we go through the 10 Commandments. And by the end, you're going to be pretty much fed up with going through it. But at any rate, in the initial stages, it still is good to have a bit of memory. If you weren't here last week and you have no idea what we're talking about, you're going to have to just try to catch up, because I'm not going to take my time to go through it all over again. But at any rate, we use our little hand actions to help us remember. I know, as juvenile as it sounds, it does actually help us to remember these 10 Commandments. And I know somebody's already smiling at me because they think this is very cool. So, we use our hands. We do a number 1. Come on, people, get your finger up. Number 1, first commandment, no other God. It's what it reminds us of, because we're pointing to God. One God, no other God before me. Second commandment, 2 fingers up, is, what is it? Do not bow down. That's right. No idols. Do not bow down. This is one of you bowing down to the one true God. Do not bow down. Third one, Father, Son, Holy Spirit is our little reminder. 3 fingers. Put them on your lips. Do not take God's name in vain. Right? Fourth commandment, easy one to remember. Tip your hand over. You got your little people walking to church. Remember the Sabbath. Keep it holy. This is easy, isn't it? Number 5, what do you do with number 5? Open hand reminds you of a hand of discipline. Spank that child. Honor your parents. That's what number 5 is about. Number 6, make a 3 with your sign language. Make another 3. You've got 6. What have you got now? Do not kill. That's right. Do not murder. Number 7, 2 and 5. Take these 2. Make sure they're together. Wrap them up tight. Do not commit adultery. Those 2 are locked together for life. Shall not come apart. Do not commit adultery. Number 8, kind of a quirky one. Start with a 5 and a 3. And your 3 comes over, steals a thumb, turns into a pinky. You've got 4 and 4. You just stole a finger. Do not steal. Do not steal, number 8. Number 9, remember this. Hold up your 10 fingers this way. And make sure you're lying to me, because you're only showing me 9. You tell me you've got 10, but you're lying. There's 1 back here, so do not lie. All right? Don't tell me you've got 10 fingers. I know better. Do not lie. Number 10, 2 big open hands. Grab everything you see, you big greedy pig. Do not covet. Do not covet. It's pretty simple, and each week we'll go through that. I know it seems kind of silly, but it actually does help us to put them in order. And again, just having them in our heads is one thing. Truly living them out is the important part, and I trust that that's what comes of this little study, that we not only begin to understand them all the more, but to see how they are laid out for us. They are, in a sense, of the law. They are like the heart, if you will, of the human body, which is the main pump that pumps your blood and keeps you alive. And then all the arteries are what goes to the rest of your body, and the pump pushes the blood to all facets and all aspects of who you are. That's the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments is the heart. And the law of God, the Word of God, the essence of God is in that heart, and it pumps its way all through all the other laws. And this is the quintessential, if you will, the way of seeing all of who God is, and in a capsulated form of what the law is in an Old Testament sense. And we are discussing this morning this second commandment of simply no idols. What does that mean? Do not bow down to idols. Well, here's the text out of Exodus chapter 20. I'll just read it for you, verses 4 to 6. This is the commandment in its entirety. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Thus reads the second command. Well, what exactly does that mean? We're going to take this commandment and we'll look at 3 aspects of it. We're going to discuss this question and answer this, I hope, fully. What exactly does that mean? What is he talking about? What is an idol, etc.? And what is wrong? What is the big deal after all? So what if we use a little bit of our sanctification, of sanctified imaginations? And so what if we are a little bit artistic and we do some things? What's the big deal? What would it matter if I made an image, a picture of the one true God? Is that a problem? What's wrong with idols? And ultimately, looking at and discussing God's response to those who break this commandment. So let's look at each in turn, and hopefully these will be hooks on which you'll hang this message, and you'll begin to see something of what this commandment is all about and in its extraordinary practicality to us. What does the commandment mean? Well, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation, perhaps you haven't been in a museum or some situation where you've been told not to take photographs. I remember taking our children some time ago when they were quite a bit younger to Vanity of Vanities. We went to a circus. And one of the announcements at the beginning was we were to take no still photography and no video photography of the entire circus. I'm not saying that I didn't do that. I'm just telling you what the commandment was. Okay? We were told because what they're doing was, I guess, copyrighted material, and they didn't want other people to steal their ideas. I don't know. They didn't explain what was behind it, but the idea was no image making. What they had was exclusive to them, and you were not to be recreating outside of what you see here. And in essence, that is the command. No photography, please. In hindsight, that would have made an excellent sermon title, but however, I am very lackluster with coming up with creative things, and so we have just simply no idols. All right then, let's just look again at this command just quickly and understand something about what it says. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything. Well, if you take that pretty strictly and take that for what it says, well, where would that leave us? I mean, would it be okay for us, for example, to carve an image of a giraffe? It says, make yourself no carved image or likeness of anything. Is it wrong to paint a portrait of your Uncle Louis or Luigi or whatever the case might be for you? Is it wrong to paint that picture and put it over the fireplace and remember that? Is it wrong to take a photograph? Well, in fact, there is a sect, if you will, loosely said, of Christian thinking that actually says it's wrong to take a literal photograph of anyone because you are making a graven image, and in doing so, you're breaking the second commandment. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it is a part of the teaching of the Amish. Now, I grant you that's a pretty fringe degree of the great umbrella of Christendom. I'm not telling you that they are Christian in the truest sense. I don't know that. There's probably individuals within that group. But overall, their teaching by and large is by works. And if you are in Lancaster County, my in-laws happen to live there. I've had some measure of contact with Amish, probably more than the average Canadian, just by virtue of family connections. If you go to any place and you hold up a camera, they immediately think that you are some obvious idiot pagan who knows nothing of the law of God. And they will turn away if they are good Amish people. They will not let you take a picture of themselves because they don't want to be involved in making a graven image. They don't want to have anything to do with breaking the second commandment. Is that what the commandment is? Does it mean you're not to make any image of anything at any time? Clearly no. That is not what the commandment is saying. And we'll see that as we unfold this. But that is not what the commandment is saying. In fact, if I can just say as an aside, this is kind of what happens with anybody who begins to handle the law. We begin to think oftentimes, and ourselves included, that if we just keep it somehow outwardly, that is actually fulfilling what God has commanded us to do. If I make sure that I just don't do this, and I don't do that, and I don't take pictures, I'm in. I've done a good job. I've kept the commandment. I've done it rigidly. But in my heart, I wish I had pictures. In my heart, I wish I had that thing. But that's irrelevant at that moment. All that matters is that I outwardly, rigidly, woodenly obey. And that's not keeping the commandment. The commandment, as you know, is all about the heart. It is not about outwardly doing the things that we see on in our flesh. God, if you know anything of Him, is more concerned with who you are on the inside. And the matters not that you don't physically take a picture of an image, but what matters is you're not making images in your own heart. That's where it begins. In fact, this kind of hypocrisy, if I can say it politely, of this outwardness begins to show itself very quickly in some people who begin to think that that's what the law is. It's outward, and they will do outward things. In fact, it's not unusual to see some very quirky pictures and scenarios in Lancaster County. These people, I'm not trying to be disparaging in any way, but they have separated themselves from the world so that they're not worldly people. Yet you can see their buggies lined up and clamoring to get into Walmart when there's a sale on. Oh, they're not materialistic. But oh man, let me tell you, they are into everything you can be into, and their rules are right to the edge. They're not allowed to have telephones. But if you have an accident at the side of the road, you will see a buggy pull over and they'll pull out a cell phone. Oh, it's okay because there's no wires. They have every excuse for everything. I'm not trying to mock. I'm just telling you their system of religion fails at every point because they believe it to be a religion of woodenness, of just keeping the rules and keeping the rules. And we're all, in some measure, on a slippery slope of falling into that kind of thinking that if I just obey some wooden thing without my heart being right before God, then I'm okay. It's foolishness. It's all about your heart. So it's not you not taking physical images or carving images. That's not the point. It's okay to have artwork in your home. In fact, God, you know, is a creative God. What does the second commandment mean? Well, I think it helps us if we look at the first commandment, just pardon a little bit of review. The first commandment, it says, there shall be no other God before me. He's to be your number one, your exclusive God. There's to be nothing else you love more, nothing else you worship more, nothing else you hold in a higher esteem more. No second place. He is your all in all. He is everything to you. He is your number one. And by virtue of that, think about it, by virtue of number one, it automatically rules out any other God. So when you come to number two, is he actually saying it's wrong to now make a wooden image or a stone statue? Well, couldn't be number two. Because he's already said in number one that there's to be no other gods. So it's not that you're not allowed to have a stone statue or stone idol. Boy, let me try to work this out so it doesn't sound ludicrous. Let me explain it to you this way. What the commandment really is, it's commanding us to be careful not to worship the true God in a false way. Do not use idols to worship the true God. Idols have already been ruled out, pagan and foreign idols have already been ruled out in commandment number one, no other gods. But now don't make an idol of the true God and use that image as a means of worshiping me. This commandment would have been necessary to the Israelites all the more than to us because they had been steeped in pagan imagery and paganism. They were raised, this entire generation who received, the first generation that received the Ten Commandments, had been raised in Egypt. And they had known and seen all the Egyptian gods. They would have known them by name. I'm not suggesting they would have worshipped them or had any connection to them, but they would have, by knowledge of being there, they would have known these gods. They would have seen images of these gods. And it would have been, quote unquote, normal for them to have a god and then see who that god is. Clearly, as you can tell from the picture in front of us, that the Egyptian gods were very good at balancing things on their heads, particularly bottles and orange things. Don't know what's going on, but I like that purple jug up there. If you get thirsty, you can, I think that's what's happening, but I'm not sure because I'm not very Egyptian. But now along comes the Israelites, who now have an invisible God, a God that they've never seen, they've never experienced, they don't know what he's like, and the first response of their hearts is going to be, we need an image. We need to know who's dealing with us and who we're dealing with. We need to see him. And so God immediately comes along and says to them, remember, this is not how you treat me. In fact, he reminds them of that in Deuteronomy chapter 4 as he begins to again remind them of some of these commandments. Verse 15, beginning at verse 15 of Deuteronomy 4, therefore, watch yourselves very carefully. Boy, I feel like I could preach a whole sermon on those 5 words. That is just a tremendous sentence in itself. And a word for all of us this morning. Watch yourselves very carefully. Because we all have a tendency to want to gravitate to some measure of something that fits in some box in our minds, that suits us to the God that is, that somehow work up some image in our own head that is different from the God who really is, and get comfortable with the ideas that we carry around in our own mind. If you don't think that is, a possibility, pardon me for saying, you're just naive. Therefore, watch yourselves very carefully, since, this is why, you saw no form on the day that the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire. That's a reference to Exodus 19, when he came in thunder and lightning and smoke, and there was no one to touch the mountain, everyone's to consecrate themselves. The 10 Commandments were going to be given. You saw no form. Beware lest you act corruptly by making a carved image for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female. Just remember, you didn't see anything. You saw nothing at all, so don't now go running off and making an image of something, because when you do so, you will fail to capture what you saw, which was nothing. So be careful, watch yourselves. Good word for all of us. So what does the commandment mean? It means do not make a false idea, even in our own minds. Do not make an image with our own hands. Do not create something to represent something of God. That's the second commandment. We are to be completely idol-free. In fact, that is why traditionally, if you'll look around in a typical Baptist church or many Protestant churches of our age, pretty boring looking in terms of artwork. That's one of the reasons. Traditionally, we have held that this is the second commandment. And I don't mean just, I'm not trying to hold up Baptists. I mean, that's just across the board. What does the commandment mean? Second of all, I want to answer the question, and perhaps have you answer the question in your own heart. What's the big deal anyways? So what? What if we make a picture of Jesus and paint him and put him on a wall? What's the big deal? What does it matter if we want to make a movie and we decide we need a Jesus because we're doing the life story of Jesus? Is that a problem? Is that a really big deal? Some of these questions can get pretty thorny pretty quickly. But let me give you some help to try and work out how this comes out in practical terms. We are to make no images of the one true God. Why is that? Well, I think when we know the answer, it helps us to figure out just exactly where we should go. First of all, I give you two reasons. First of all, any image that we make fails to represent who he is. Any image that you make will be limited to a two-dimensional figure, and it will fail to capture the essence of who he is. And ultimately, what you create is an insult and something less than who he is. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of having your children come home from picture day, and you finally, the photos finally arrive, and if you're back in the age where everything was on celluloid and it was actually a big deal, you should wait for them to be developed and to pull them out of the envelope, and then you had to decide whether or not it was good or not, and then you had to, remember back just before the wheel was invented, do you remember those ones? Have you ever had one of those moments where you pull your kid out of the envelope and you go, wait a minute, that's not the best looking picture I've ever seen? Hold on. We didn't really just capture the essence of my child. I'm not really that excited. I'm not so sure this is exactly what I want to put up on the mantelpiece. I'm not really sure. We've just captured the moment. It just doesn't quite do it. It's close, but no, I don't really quite want to have that one as a keepsake. I'm glad to hear you chuckling. I actually got to tell you, when I was putting this slide together, I was sitting in my office all by myself, laughing out loud. I just that is hilarious. Okay, I'm glad to hear you guys laughing. You see, you would not keep that image. Why? That is your child. I mean, in this case, maybe not precisely by example, but for the sake of illustration, that is your child. What's the big deal? I mean, what's the problem with that? What's the hiccup? Well, And I know what the problem with that is, because you know when you get a picture and you pull your passport picture out and you have to get to the border and you have to make a face so the border guard actually knows, oh yeah, it is you. You know that you're mad at this picture that hangs forever in your license and you don't want it. Why? Because it's not really you. You look mad. I'm not mad all the time, but I look mad in this picture. And you know that you've captured a moment in time that forever describes you in an inaccurate way. That is exactly what God is saying. Every time you make an image, you are capturing something of your idea of who He is in a moment of time that is not accurate. Because in making one idea, you have left out a myriad of truth of who God is. Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling. His background was such that he had no thought that it would perhaps be inappropriate to pick up a paintbrush and paint God. So we have in the Sistine Chapel a piece amidst the great vastness of the ceiling, what is known as the creation of Adam. And here you have God. Is that God? I mean, that's what Michelangelo's put up there. Is that actually what we should look at and say, there He is? Does God have hands and figures? Is God muscular like that, kind of an old man, but kind of robust? Is that the image that you should have in your head? Does He really have a beard and He's actually kind of oldish? Is He timeless or does He have time? Is He needing to lie back and wear clothes and look loungy like that? Is that God? I mean, is that a fair depiction of who He is? Let me ask you something. Where is any measure of God's transcendence in that picture, in that image? Where is His omniscience? Where is His omnipresence? Where is His wrath against sin? Where is His love and His mercy found at the cross? Where is all of who God is in Christ in that picture? It is not there. It cannot be there. And it is any two-dimensional picture, it always falls short of capturing all of the transcendence of God. He is beyond our imagination. He is beyond our comprehension. He is beyond our vision. And anytime we pick up a pen, pencil, or other means of opportunity to capture who He is, we've created an idol. We've made a false image. And we immediately fail to capture God because it can't be done. So why do we not make images of God? Because they fail to bring credit to Him. Isaiah 46 verse 5 says it this way, obviously rhetorical question, to whom will you liken me? Now there's just silence after this question because nobody can answer this. Whom will you liken me and make me equal? All you hear is crickets right now. And compare me. You've got no one to compare. You've got no one to compare you to. God, no created thing, nothing in this realm, nothing we know, nothing we can experience. You are beyond us all, that we may be alike. There's nothing. And so therefore, we are without any means by which we can create any idea physically, also mentally, of just exactly who God is. What's wrong with idols? They fail to represent who He is. And so we must not make them. Second reason, just by way of bringing this to your attention, they ultimately lead us to false ideas about Him. When people make idols, you begin to realize that they take those ideas and they run with them. And people have made large mistakes through history because they have taken images and ideas of who Christ is, and they've gone with that. And it has led to some very warped theology and very bad thinking. And you know in the age we live in that any image, digital image, can be manipulated, can be made to look like anything. And when you look at an image that's been manipulated, I mean, obviously this is so ludicrous. That says Amish Airlines in case you can't read it. We all know that can't possibly be true because there's no wings on the buggy. If there were wings, that could happen. Okay? clearly that's a ludicrous illustration for the point I'm trying to make, that you could actually look at an image that has been digitally manipulated and believe it to be true. Okay, you can put your head on a very muscular physique and make yourself look like something you're not and hand it out and have people believe that that's who you are. And they begin to take at face value this image of something that's not even reality. And that's what happens. When people make images of Christ or images of God, they begin to take those images as if that is exactly who he is. People have been fixated on the cross of Christ and have been fixated on his death because they've been shown crucifixes so frequently and held before them so constantly that they begin to think that all that there is of God, if you want to know Christ, it's all about his misery and his burden of his death. And I can have my sins forgiven if I suffer like that too. And if I show penance and I walk across such a place on my knees over broken glass, I can have my sins forgiven. It's all about pain. It's all about torture. And there's no empty tomb. There's no victory because we've been fixated on an image. Exodus 32, when the people saw Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, that's from verse 20 to verse 32, 12 chapters it took to get the Ten Commandments and all the law. They got a little impatient. The people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. Now don't be misunderstanding this text and thinking that they made some false god. They were not. They made a golden calf to represent the one true God. They said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made the proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." You notice capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, that's the name of God. The one true God, the mysterious one true God. That's who this image was. And what did this image, when it was held before them, what did that produce in them? Well, if you've seen Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments, you've probably got that image in your head. And if you've read the book, you know what the text says. They got up, and because of the image that was before them, they felt free to worship God in an unbecoming way. They immediately felt free that it was okay to act this way. That's why it's so dangerous sometimes when we hold up half of a God from the pulpit. If I tell you God is love, 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 God is peace, 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 we get the idea that he's only a half-hearted God and he doesn't really have a problem with sin, and we begin to behave in a particular way. And our worship will reflect that. And there's no sense of contrition in our hearts. There's no sense of need for confession between each other. Oh, we're all fine, we're all fine. And our worship reflects an image of a false God. Isaiah 55, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." We must have right ideas about God. What's wrong with idols? They fail to represent him, and they ultimately lead us down a garden path. They give us the wrong ideas, we fixate on those ideas, and we don't know who God is, and we're way off in left field about true worship. Let's just quickly wrap up this morning and just give you a synopsis here. How does God respond then to those who break his commands? Well, it's fairly obvious from the text, but I'm going to tell you there is an emotional response. You notice I have that word in quotes, and a spiritual response, which is also in quotes. And I say emotional because I use that as an anthropomorphic language, because the ultimate result of what we get out of the text is an anthropomorphism of who God is. And anthropomorphism is something borrowed from the human realm to express something of a transcendent God. Okay? Let me try to say that again. We borrow something from something that we know, jealousy, to explain something of God that is beyond our real knowing. So when we see, for example, that God is jealous, which we see in this text, "You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God." Man is never the measure of God. You don't say, "Oh, I know what the word jealous means. That's bad." Because you're thinking of human jealousy. We're forgetting that it's God's jealousy. God is holy, God is perfect, God is pristine. His jealousy is far and away different than our jealousy. What does that mean? But you know what? We find this throughout the Old Testament over and over again. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. And you'll notice that jealousy and foreign gods go together. With abomination, they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they'd never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom their fathers had never dreaded. You are unmindful of the rock who bore you. So he reminds them, I created you. You're creating those idols. The rock that bore you, and you forgot the rock who gave you birth. You forgetting that you made that thing up, but I made you. They have made me jealous with what is no gods, Deuteronomy 32:21. They provoked me to anger with their idols. Jealousy and idols, hand in hand. Why? Because I'll tell you something, if you're married, you have a jealousy over your wife or your husband, or you should. You will. If somebody else comes in and intervenes in that relationship, there is a righteous jealousy, a guarding of your heart over that relationship. Wait a minute, this is wrong. You can't do that. Wait a minute, you're mine. That's all God is saying. You are mine. And I am going to jealously guard my reputation. You don't go making images of me. You don't go making pictures of who you think I should look like, because you've brought me down. You're bringing my name down. You're bringing my character down. You're changing something of me. Do you going to lie back if someone starts to slander your name? Wouldn't you get up in righteous jealousy and begin to defend your character and your reputation? Wouldn't you guard who you are? That's all God is doing. He is guarding who he is. How dare you bring my name? Do you think he's just going to sit back passively? Oh, just go do what you want. Make whatever images and ideas. No, that's not who he is. God jealously guards his own character, his own nature. Let me give you a contemporary example, if I may. I run the risk of sounding like I'm trying to be a commercial and somehow promoting this. I don't know enough about it, so I don't want you to think that I'm telling you should run off and see this film, and please don't misunderstand my illustration. But apparently, from what I know and read, there were a group of people who came up with this story idea. And they knew that the story idea of the woman who wrote Mary Poppins was, and being a difficult woman, from what I understand, and all the challenges of it, would make a good story. But they knew that in writing this script that they would also use Disney characters and a name, Walt Disney. Walt Disney, they knew, was a highly protected commodity. And they knew that if they were ever going to get this film made, they'd have to go to Disney itself and get their permission. And in fact, Disney's first response was to buy the script, to pay them lots of money, and bury it so it would never be made, because they knew that Walt Disney is a chain smoker and a hard drinker. And Disney's reputation could be anything but who the real Walt Disney was. And if this script fell into the wrong hands and they started to use what really is history, our reputation could come unraveled. So they turned the tables, they bought the rights, they did what they do legally, I don't understand it all, and they found someone to represent Mr. Disney who the whole world likes, who has never had a controversy, who thinks they're cherry pie and wonderful American. Tom Hanks. He can play Mr. Disney. That would be fine. He's never said a bad word in ever a movie. He doesn't kill people in his movies. He's a nice man. He can play Mr. And no smoking. And apparently there's no smoking in this movie. And any drinking is just offhanded and an aside. And they just manipulated the whole situation so that their reputation stays intact. That's all they did. I'm not saying it's right, I'm just telling you what they did. They jealously guarded their reputation. It's all that God does. And if you are one who does not care and takes God flippantly and brings him down in your own mind, oh, I don't like the God of the Old Testament, he's a God of wrath and meanness, and I like the God of the New Testament, and he's love and patience and kindness, and oh, that's who God I think of. I like to think of God as, oh, this and that, and you've got your own ideas. Well, bully for you. But let me tell you something, you are rising under God's jealousy. And God moves against people who treat the second commandment as a light thing. As if it doesn't matter what you really think about God. As if it really makes no difference if you've got the wrong image in your head. Let me tell you something. God's jealousy moves against you, and his spiritual response to those people he tells us in the text, is kind of odd in some ways, but he creates paganism. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I tried to think of a way to describe what this text says. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. Visiting the iniquity on the children. Every subsequent generation, I'm going to let them go. They're never going to know who I am. If you steer wrong, and you begin to worship an idol, you're going to teach your children those wrong ideas. And guess what? Your children are going to hear those wrong ideas, and they're going to go with that. And they're going to take those wrong ideas, and they're going to pass them on to their children. And you know what happens? Wrong worship, wrong ideas breeds, ultimately, pagan behavior. Ultimately, wrong behavior. And God says, I'm just going to let you reap what you're sowing, what you want to sow. You're going to get wrong ideas, let me tell you, it's going to ruin your families. It's going to destroy your family line all the way down. You are going to end up in a complete chaos within the family unit. And that seems to be what's taking place. It's not that an individual can't come to Christ out of that. It's not what this is ever saying. It's not that somehow you carry this burden, that somehow you have to get rid of this guilt that your fathers have put on you and it's under you. You're free to make your own choices. But the umbrella is you will be raised in a pagan environment that will delude you, that will keep you blinded, that will not allow you to see the truth. And you will be lost. And that's God's punishment. If you don't think that's true, how many times have you met somebody and they say, well, I was raised in a different faith. Well, I was raised to think of God this way. Well, and they get galvanized to who God is. Because the second commandment has been broken. And God says, when you break the second commandment, you get to be galvanized to the false ideas of a false God and ruin entire generations. This is not a small thing. This is the second commandment. Do you have right ideas about God? Do you take the whole counsel of God? Do you know the God of revelation, not the God of imagination? Do you know him through Christ? Do you see him in Christ? Do you worship him through Christ and in Christ, and you know all there is about him as much as you know? Do you follow and worship the one true God with all your heart, with all your soul? You know this, and this is your heart's desire. This is the second commandment. This is what we're called to obey. This is getting back to basics. Let's pray.